We live in an age of paradox, unprecedented knowledge, technological prowess, productive capacities, and prosperity. And yet at the same time, we find ourselves in a period of rising uncertainty and rising insecurity, which I think few anticipated in those heady days at the end of the Cold War, when we thought we had gotten past these issues and we were moving to a time of greater well-being and security for all. Certainly now we are in a period of great question and uncertainty, a period which many describe as a turbulence with rising levels of insecurity. And I'd like to talk to this turbulence and the situation we're in now, because I think if our goal is, and certainly is, to try to address the challenges that we're facing today, I think it will only be as effective in doing so as we are in understanding exactly the situation we're in, how we got in there, the causes of that situation, and then, therefore, what possible remedies there may be. And I think this whole seminar and the 4 topics that have been chosen really cover much of the breadth of this topic very well. We live in an age of growing political, economic, technological, and industrial development, yet insecurity is rising in all the sectors of global society, not only related to militarization and war, changes in the bilateral, multilateral environment of the world, political, economic, technological, environmental, social, democratic, and cultural changes that are taking place quite unexpectedly and quite rapidly. We also see that growing prosperity seems to be associated with an increasing level of disparities, of inequalities, of rising anxiety and sense of want among millions of people around the world, and depletion of the infinite abundance of material nature which we've been relying on to build a better world for all. This rising levels of insecurity, of uncertainty, is breeding greater and greater sense of insecurity and violence that few anticipated. The insecurity is breeding fear. The fear is breeding a polarization of society, a rising amount of extremism of many different types in many places around the world, and a natural tendency to look and see who we can blame for this situation we're in and who is responsible for the challenges and difficulties we face. There are many apparent causes for our problem, which I think we have discussed and we're fairly aware of, but I'll just mention them briefly. We see a radicalization and threats to democracy in countries around the world, including maybe especially today my own, the United States. A threats and a retreat from many of the gains of the 1990s, of the end of the Cold War. Revival, as the president said, the revival of the nuclear arms race, war in Europe, which we never expected to see again, rising military spending, where we thought we were moving more and more to disarmament, a revival of competitive nationalism, the threats of climate change and environmental threats, the loss of support and momentum of multilateralism, threats to universal values, which we thought were being affirmed 30 years ago, a loss of faith and trust in institutions at all levels, a loss of trust in traditional sources of power, doubts and uncertainties about our future. And so discovering the roots and reasons for this dilemma that we're in and of the turbulence becomes important, essential, I would say. We cannot hope to master it if we don't fully understand the sources for this situation we're in. It's a topic that WAS has been debating for quite some time to try to understand where we are in the process of global social evolution that is leading us to this period of increasing uncertainty and insecurity. One of the obvious reasons is the rapid and accelerating pace of change in all fields and at all levels of global society. Never have we lived in a world that is changing so rapidly in many ways, and that speed being more and more difficult for us to accommodate to, for us to adjust to positively, is not only raising uncertainty and insecurity, but instability and greater turbulence. The catalysts for this increasing speed are fairly well known or easy to identify. What we often talk about is the speed of technological evolution and deployment, and how it not only offers promising advances, it offers disturbing impacts and increasing uncertainty about where we will be and where future generations will be. The pressure of accelerated globalization as we become more and more connected with one another, whether or not we want to be or not, we are more and more an interconnected, interdependent global society. And the speed of that, in spite of whatever our political processes may be, the interdependence is increasing, especially or made irresistible or inevitable because of the fact that we're tempting and challenging the environmental resources of the whole planet, and we're in all of this together, and there's no way that any of us can step out and be bystanders on this. We are all in this process together. The increasing interconnectedness and interdependence, the accelerated intercultural contact, and through communications as well as contact and migration around the world, is reached unprecedented levels. The multiplication and rapid dissemination of information, and of course disinformation at the same time, accelerated immigration, a revolution of rising expectations that younger generations all over the world, and I'm particularly referring in the developing world, expected to see substantial, impressive gains in recent years and in the years to come. And those expectations are more and more being put into question, more and more wondering about whether or not the future will really be better, the youth all over will be better than before. Again, all of these factors contribute to a sense of social inequality and social insecurity. A rising assertion of the rights of minorities and our expectation that it should go faster and faster, and yet we see a fallback, a kickback, and a resistance to the aspirations of countless millions. A resistance to existing and previous centers of power and self-interest, who now see that as the world moves forward, they risk losing the place, the dominant power that they had in the past, and the reactions and resistance that come because of that fear of or unwillingness to accept a rapidly changing world. We saw that clearly in the steps of Russia and their affirmation to restore, to overcome the big mistake of the breakup of the Soviet Union and the liberation of millions of people into a more democratic society. But we're also seeing the same thing witnessed in forms like the United States, which are thinking that we should be reaffirming our position as even the sole superpower in a world where we really need multilateralism and we really need an increasing distribution and equal sharing of power in the world. So we're getting a resistance to the change, a resistance to the progress that's being made, and an effort to go back by many at a time when we really need to be moving forward, because the problems generated by our progress up until now will only be enhanced if we try to revert to methods of the past which failed us at that time. This is obviously true in the field of environment. This is no time to withdraw from the Paris Accord or to continue with an unbridled economic development at the expense of the planet. We have to go forward, and yet there's increasing friction and debate and resistance to embrace the responsibilities of it. We see a declining power of national governments, another area where the globalization has created a greater sense of insecurity and resistance by national governments that want to be able to assert their autonomy, assert their independence at a time when that autonomy and independence is more and more an illusion because we are in this together. We see a rising assertion of the power of money, of business, of the characters of a plutocracy in government where the freedom of democracy is being overrun by the power of wealth and the power of money to determine how democracy and who democracy will serve. The assertion of superpowers, rising expectation and resentment of the status quo against change, that we see that in the field of immigration, the desperation of populations moving towards the developed world, resulting more and more resentment and efforts to stop the flow without taking concrete practical steps to address the problems that are stimulating it. We see breakdown of global institutions and rule of law, pressure to accept the unknown leading to reactions against change, the resistance of outmoded ideas and theories defending their traditions and self-interest, an institutional inertia in the very areas where we really need rapid change in our institutions, and I'll just cite one of them now because it's one the Academy is very much working on, is in the field of education. We need new ideas being generated by our global educational systems. We need enhanced capacity to meet the employment needs and the skill needs and the knowledge and understanding, but we're not getting it. And this is only one example of our institutions are not able to adapt to the demands of this period. The assertion of new centers of power and new types of power, the democratization of military power, which we see occurring in the wars that are now going on, where more and more you don't need to be a superpower in order to have military threats against even much larger enemies. The liberation of power of capitalism from the control of national governments and global law. The revival or urgency of tendency of imperialism in Russia, in China, in the Trump America, the technological threats that we are all familiar with, that what started as the double-edged sword of nuclear weapons, now as we are confronted with the threats arising from the misuse of artificial intelligence. The decline of religion, an important topic which we'll be hearing and discussing in this time, a loss of faith in failed ideas and universal values of the past, combined with a defensive reaction against rapid change. Now, I'm mentioning all of these things not to complicate things, but to suggest that our remedies, if they are to be effective, are going to have to address these root causes. We are, as the President already mentioned, the issue of remilitarization and the threats of nuclear weapons. We're not able to take and address the nuclear arms race in isolation from all of these other things, because they're all interconnected with each other, all interdependent and all aggravating and complicating one another. So we're going to have to look at this in a broader way and try to understand, how do we manage this very challenging, unprecedented situation of humanity trying to consciously guide itself into a new era of global peace and security, unprecedented because we've never met a situation of this complexity and speed of change as we do now. And I'd like to mention a few of the areas that I think have to be considered in a comprehensive approach and adequate strategy for this. We're going to have to address, in order to hope for an effective outcomes, which I certainly believe we must and we can get. One is we're going to have to respond to the rising stresses and tensions of rapid social evolution and the uncertainty that's been created by it in all of its places around the world. One of the obvious highest priorities is to restore peace and a cooperative security framework, which we thought we had been moving towards in the last 30 years and now find an increasing polarization and return to competitive national security at a time where we really need global cooperative security, not my security or one country's security at the expense or threat to others, but a security system that enhances the sense of security for all. And certainly we don't have that now. And our failure for building that since the end of the Cold War is one of the very important reasons for the situation that we're in now. We're going to have to address, as President said, the rising threat of a returned nuclear arms race, the breakdown of multilateral institutions, the breakdown of global rule of law, which we see remarkably, and the loss of momentum in world trade, which offered the possibility of much greater cooperation and much greater benefits to the world if only it could be managed in an equitable way. We're going to have to directly address the issues related to security, not only the security of nations, and the point I'd really like to stress is the security of people, the human security. And our multilateral system up until now, the system that we had during the Cold War and the system we have now, is not only failing to give that security to the nation state, we see rising anxiety, but much more so to the security of people, to individuals. The concept of human security was first voiced by the United Nations in 1994, not just looking at the macro level threats of such as climate change or COVID and so forth, but looking at the sense of security of individuals around the world, food security, health security, the security of communities, the security of their human rights. We're going to have strategies that not only address it at the macro level, as the UN has been trying to do through the Sustainable Development Goals, but will address it and message to people at the individual level that we're moving to a world with greater security for all. And focus on strategies that will communicate that to people all over the world. I stress the importance of that because unless the population, unless the public, the voting public, has a feeling and a sense that there are answers that are going to lead to greater security for them, there's going to be natural tendency to greater extremism, a polarization of society, and the breakdown of democratic consensus that we see happening in these stages. Obviously, an effort to restore the momentum of multilateralism and the faith in universal values, as well as the sanctity of national sovereignty. And another issue which we're going to be discussing, I'm looking forward to, is on science and technology. Something that was at the origin, a concern that was at the origin of the founding of the World Academy and has been a preoccupation of Pugwash, is that science cannot be living in an ivory tower and just pursuing knowledge for its knowledge's sake. Science has to accept the responsibility for the knowledge it develops and the instruments and technologies that it's developing. And that sense is going to have to be greater and greater than it has been in the past. And certainly we see that most evident in the field of artificial intelligence. We can't leave the proliferation of technology or the application of science simply to the motives of a business community looking for profit or shareholders that want to maximize their benefits. And science, which is the origin of that knowledge and that power, is going to have to find institutional mechanisms to exercise a greater authority and responsibility. We're also going to have to be able to use the emerging technology more effectively than we can, not only for the benefit of shareholders or the benefit of the most developed countries, but for the benefit of all. The Academy, again, we're working now on strategies using artificial intelligence that could, for the first time, could provide the possibility of world-class education, equitable higher education all over the world, something that's never been affordable or possible up until now. So we also not only have to be afraid of the misuses of technology, we have to be very aggressively looking at how we can harness these powers positively for the maximum benefit of all, including issues like if technology is going to be generating more and more of the economic development and economic returns of the society, we're going to have to change our systems of taxation and distribution to be ensured that the benefits of that technology go to the benefit of all humanity and not just those who happen to be shareholders in its use. So I'm trying to point out that the sources, the points at which we have to act, are very broadly distributed and can't rely on any single or small number of strategies. And then in closing, we're going to have to look at the fundamental ideas that have been driving our systems, our policies, our institutions, our theories of development. We live in a world where every sector is interconnected with all others, and a silo-based specialized system of expertise is already breaking down. It's no longer necessary for us in a world that's so interconnected. We're going to have to be focusing more on what we call transdisciplinary knowledge, which looks at the interdependence of all of these different dimensions and formulates policies, strategies, institutional frameworks that are capable of dealing with the world as a whole rather than dealing with it in little pieces, often in a disparate way, which generates more problems than it's solving. So all of these things are before us on a very heavy agenda, before us for the agenda of all humanity. And I'll just end with two things. One is the need for new leadership. And by that, I don't mean that we get better people and we need to somehow out of a miraculous box pull out better leaders than we have today. A better concept and understanding of leadership and what is required and the values of leaders and the knowledge of leaders. And unless our intellectual environment is producing that knowledge that helps our coming leaders to understand the complexity of the world we live in better than we do today, better than even our theorists do today. And that's why we give such an important emphasis to, we have to advance our knowledge of the world, not just of science and technology, but of humanity and the world we live in. And I would just close by saying, as we have already mentioned in earlier meetings, I think a starting point for this is what our colleagues have called a peace offensive. We have to recognize that the bringing of peace into the world and the bringing of security is not just through dealing these very challenging problems in Russia and Ukraine or in the Middle East, but there are stresses, there are causes of violence, there are causes of instability and rising tension in all countries in the world, at all levels, domestically, internally, locally, and globally. And we need to develop a new type of diplomacy that focuses not just at reading in the papers and looking at what's happening at the macro level, but how do we reduce the tensions and address the insecurities and the problems at all levels within our nations and between nations by unilateral incremental initiatives that can bring down the heat, the tension, that is so much preventing us from getting the very type of leadership we need in the world today, where we're all focused on the same goals and we're all working in unison to address them. I very much look forward to this important and very interesting discussion. Thank you.